Sam Monson from PFF joins us on the show. He's the lead NFL analyst for PFF, and he's also the co-host of the PFF NFL show. So, Sam, thanks for taking the time to join with us. I know you've got your top 50 list that is coming out, the top 10 at least tomorrow. We know 11 through 50, and we're excited to get into that with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and for most people realize it's going to be Josh Allen at the top of the Bills list on this. He comes in at number 12, and people are like, well, he's better. Well, he's second best quarterback on your list, and you've got guys like Aaron Donald and all these guys. I mean, there's a lot of really elite players on this list. What's the most difficult part about comparing a defensive lineman pass rusher to a quarterback, or a great running back to a wide receiver or a corner?
Yeah, it's all really difficult. And, one of the things we felt when we were doing this list, and it's important to point out, it's not just my list. There were a bunch of other names in PFF involved, so we can spread the blame around. But when we were doing the list, we felt a lot like we had the top 12 guys, and there were 12 names, and you're going to fit 10 of them into a top 10 list. So we're kind of looking at this list going, 2 of these top 10 players are going to have to be ranked outside the top 10. We've got 12 guys for 10 spots, and Josh Allen was one of those players that just missed out. But it's difficult. I think one way of doing it is to try and look at these guys relative to their peers, and that's always been the way that we've sort of articulated how good Aaron Donald has been in the past, is to say it's really difficult to directly compare Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Aaron Donald. But one thing you can do is say the gap between Donald and the next guy has always been so huge. And it isn't necessarily the case when it comes to quarterbacks. In any given year, Josh Allen could be the best quarterback, or Joe Burrow or Patrick Mahomes. It's a lot closer together than it is at some of these positions where there's clearly one guy who's head and shoulders above the rest at that position.
So comparing the other players like you just did, for those who want to know, Justin Jefferson was number 11 from the Minnesota Vikings. We don't know 1 through 10 yet. Again, that's going to drop tomorrow on Friday, July 21st. But number 12 for Josh Allen, why is he deserving, if we're painting it in a positive light? You explained it's really tough. We thought there were 12 people who could fit into the top 10. Why is Josh Allen deserving of being one of the best in the NFL in your eyes?
I mean, we've already seen what he's capable of at his peak, which is as good as any quarterback in the NFL. He's gone toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes, on the biggest stage in the playoffs, and he didn't come up short. The defense was what ended up letting them down in that game, but Josh Allen was slugging it out with Patrick Mahomes and playing at that kind of level and looking every bit as good. And I think when Josh Allen is playing at his best, he's in that same category of there's no answer. There's no solution to this. There's no defense you can call that he won't make wrong by just being better than you are and out executing whatever it is, whether it's with his arm, whether it's with his legs. He's capable of that kind of play. Now, I think the thing that separates him from Patrick Mahomes right now is that certainly last season, Allen was prone to a few more mistakes than Patrick Mahomes was. And that's the one area of his game that would give you just a little concern relative to somebody like Mahomes. And when I say concern, we're saying he's the 12th best player in the entire NFL. So it's not like Josh Allen is anything other than a superstar, but these are the kind of hairs we're splitting when we're ranking the top 50 guys in the league.
Yeah, certainly. You kind of got to run into that. You can say Mahomes and Allen because their skill set is so much on display every play because you're looking right at them with the ball in their hands. Meanwhile, you got wide receivers like Justin Jefferson, Steph Diggs, Jamar Chase. Go down the list of elite, A.J. Brown. Go down the list of these wide receivers. It's hard to quantify how different they are, and how much do you think who's throwing them the ball plays into the hierarchy of who's playing well. You got CeeDee Lamb in Dallas. You got all these great players, and it really does a lot of times depend on who's calling the plays and who's pulling the trigger.
It does. It's a huge factor. It's why it's really difficult to rank football players. It's not just, how do you compare a wide receiver to a defensive tackle, to a cornerback, to a quarterback. You have to be aware of the other factors and the supporting cast and how much each other position sort of affects each one of those players. And for wide receivers, it's absolutely relevant who's throwing them the football. And for a guy like Davante Adams, that's why I think last season was big for him. He stepped outside of the embrace of Aaron Rodgers and showed that he could still be the same guy with a different quarterback. And I think objectively, a worse quarterback. You know, Derek Carr is not a Hall of Fame quarterback like Aaron Rodgers was. So being able to do the same thing and keep on trucking with a different environment and a different guy throwing him the football was huge for somebody like Davante Adams. But you absolutely, you know, have to bear that in mind when you're looking at, you know, maybe a down season from a certain player. Did his supporting cast fail him, or did he have a down year that in any given season?
Stefon Diggs ranks at number 24 on the top 50. When you're looking at just wide receivers, he ranks 5th best heading into the 2023 season. What do you think is in store for Stefon Diggs this year with the Bills?
I mean, I think he'll have another fantastic season. Stefon Diggs has only been productive with that Bills offense. He's still by far their number one threat, their number one target. There's no reason he shouldn't have another season that, you know, leads the league in categories or threatens to lead the league. He's incredibly productive, one of the best route runners in the NFL, always been a better contested catch guy than you would expect for somebody that size. I think he caught 50% of the contested balls thrown his way last season, which is a very high number. Particularly for a guy that isn't, you know, 6'3", 220 pounds, that kind of thing. So, and the connection he has with Josh Allen is special. So, absolutely, I would expect him to have another phenomenal year this season.
One of the other articles you've written about has to do with coaching and the offensive coordinators around the league. And one of the interesting premises that you made, the point that you made, which I got to admit, it escaped me for a minute. There's not that many offensive coordinators that would fall into a top 10 because you've got guys that are just like Bill O'Brien in New England, really pretty good offensive coordinator by any standard, but he was at Alabama last year.
Right.
Same thing all over the league. Plus, you've got guys like Eric Bieniemy, who in Kansas City was called the offensive coordinator, but Andy Reid's standing there with a play sheet in his hand. All kinds of unique situations all around the NFL for all 32 teams. There's less than half of the teams that have a clear-cut offensive coordinator who have maybe like in Buffalo, a defensive head coach who's not calling plays and never will. That's becoming more and more rare, or at least it's more unique than it has been in the past.
Yeah, I mean, in today's NFL that's driven by offense, these offensive coordinators, as soon as they show anything, they're hired immediately to be head coaches and to bring their system to a team that's struggling and try and, you know, resuscitate a franchise. So you're left with basically half the league that are either first or second year offensive coordinators. There's another group that you mentioned, that the likes that are doing it under an offensive minded head coach who it's difficult to figure out how much they're doing relative to the head coach pulling the strings. And then there's a few of these guys that are kind of retreads and proven commodities of some description, but have had to go elsewhere or had to take a step down. So, you know, we did defensive coordinators a few weeks ago, and we did head coaches, and nobody at PFF wanted to do the offensive coordinator list because you're kind of left with this situation of how much do we know about so many of these guys? And the list feels like it should really be sort of 5 names strong. And then you get into trying to do a bit of guesswork. But it's a very sort of strange landscape right now when it comes to offensive coordinators in the NFL.
Ken Dorsey earned himself number 5 on that list for top offensive coordinators in the NFL, and number 1 were the Detroit Lions, Ben Johnson, then Kellen Moore from the Chargers, Bill O'Brien from the Patriots, and Shane Waldron from the Seattle Seahawks. That means the Kansas City Chiefs were outside of the top 5. I know our fans are probably happy to hear that, but why did Ken Dorsey earn number 5 on this list? We saw him in his first year with the team. The team averaged over 28 points a game, which was really great to see them in top 5 in a lot of categories on offense. But where do you think this guy can go in year number 2 with a little bit more comfortability, I think, under his belt too?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, Buffalo were top 5 in pretty much any meaningful offensive category, whether it was a kind of base number or a more in-depth analytical data point. That it was one of the best offenses in the NFL. Obviously, having Josh Allen, Stefon Diggs, that's going to help that. But I think we saw that the guy that everybody thought was sort of pulling the strings, the mastermind behind this offense, left. He got his own head coaching job. and they were able to promote from within and not see a giant drop off, not see, this collapse because the guy that was running it left the building. So I think we saw the occasional questionable play call from Ken Dorsey, but overall, we clearly saw that this offense was going to continue to play at an extremely high level. And if he, irons out a couple of those errors that he had in year one and year two, then I think he can show himself as one of the better offensive coordinators in the NFL, and maybe get his own head coaching opportunity down the line.
And it's interesting, too, because you do give some credence to what guys have done in the past, which is really the only basis you can, because nobody can predict the future. Yeah. Kellen Moore leaving Dallas, going to the Chargers this year. First year as the Chargers head offensive coordinator. Who knows how he will do, but certainly a guy who has had some success in Dallas. And then, of course, Bill O'Brien coming back to New England. Both those guys, Kellen Moore, number 2 on your list, Bill O'Brien, number 3. And the guy that I'd forgotten about that was really intriguing to me was Shane Waldron. And for Bills fans, they may not know the name Shane Waldron. He's the guy that got the most out of a forgotten Geno Smith last year in Seattle. He really got a lot of kudos. And certainly Geno got a lot of credit as well. But Shane Waldron really resurrecting the career of Geno Smith in Seattle. And I think really you'd have to put him in a short list of really quality offensive coordinators.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, when Shane Waldron was hired, the conversation was, how is he going to get the most out of Russell Wilson? And can that offense sort of play to Russell Wilson's strengths and, try and get him back on track? And then obviously Russell Wilson gets traded away, and Waldron ends up having to do this for a completely different quarterback with a different skill set, and ends up getting a career year out of him. And not just a career year, but a year I don't think many people thought was there, a completely unexpected season from Geno Smith. So I think last year generally was very impressive work from Waldron, and a very different job requirement than I guess he would have expected to have when they hired him.
PFF's lead NFL analyst, Sam Monson, is on with us. We've been talking about this offense this upcoming season and trying to figure out, who's going to be on the field with who. What is this going to look like? Is this team going to run more 12 personnel because they drafted a guy in Dalton Kincaid? What are going to be the new wrinkles? And you believe that Deonte Harty, one of the new wide receivers for this team, can have a big role with the Bills this season. Why do you believe that he can be a piece to this offense?
He's a really exciting player, and obviously his career production isn't there. He hasn't been a high volume guy, but a couple of years ago when he was at his most healthy, his most impactful in that Saints offense, at the end of the year, we did a series where we looked at top wide receivers in a lot of different areas. So against man coverage, against press coverage, against zone, in a whole variety of different categories. And the top of the list was all the same guys you expect: Stefon Diggs, A.J. Brown, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. It was all the elite receivers in the NFL. But if you didn't set the threshold high enough in terms of playing time, Deonte Harty kept popping into that list as well, as somebody that was incredibly productive in a much smaller sample size than any of these other guys. And he's got a lot of the skills that makes him into a high impact type of player. He's got blazing speed. He's got short area quickness. He can make some contested catches as well. And this is by far the best quarterback situation that he's ever going to have played with Josh Allen. Yes, he played in New Orleans, but it was the very tail end of Drew Brees' career where he didn't have the arm anymore to push it downfield the way he used to. So the environment is here for Harty to show his best play. And his best play is a problem for defenders to match up with, because you don't have players that can rival his speed and quickness and that awkward size. He's such a smaller guy that a 6'1" cornerback is not used to dealing with that. And it is a very difficult different type of receiver to try and match up with. So I'm excited for what the additions generally with this Bills offense can do. Dalton Kincaid in the draft, obviously, and a guy like Deonte Harty. I think this could be a really fun offense this year, even relative to the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, and the Bills have spent a lot of their assets trying into bolstering and refurbishing the offensive line up front. Their highest up free agent contract was to Connor McGovern from Dallas, the Dallas left guard. They drafted Osiris Torrance from Florida and signed David Edwards, who was the starting guard for the Rams in their Super Bowl run 2 years ago. They put a lot of effort into getting that offensive line better, plus bringing in Latavius Murray and Damian Harris along with James Cook. there's a lot of thought here in Buffalo that maybe the size and strength and athleticism of the offensive line may dictate maybe perhaps a shift or at least a bigger emphasis on situational running plays. Damian Harris, Latavius Murray pounding the rock a little bit and taking the burden off Josh Allen, particularly in short yardage goal line. What do you, and off the top of your head, and I know you don't have this at your fingertips, Josh Allen's running ability, it's kind of a gift and a curse. You hate to see called runs by your quarterback, but they work when he's that big and fast as Josh. What do Latavius Murray and Damian Harris and this big offensive line, how does that change your view of maybe what Ken Dorsey has at his disposal?
I think it's about options, and about the number of ways you have to win. And that's a great thing about a guy like Josh Allen is he presents you as many different ways to win as there is at the quarterback position. He's big, he's strong, he's fast. He can run right over defensive backs. He can run around defensive linemen. He brings as many ways to win to the table as any quarterback in the NFL. But I think there's an acknowledgement with Josh himself, with the Bills coaches. There's only so many times you want to go back to that well, because every time you do, you potentially expose him to that hit that could cause an injury, that could put him out for a period of time. So if you can do the same thing with a different player, with a power running back, and not have to rely on Josh Allen on those third downs, on those fourth downs where you've got to have 2 yards, I think they want to lean on that a little bit more next season and reduce the burden on Josh just a little bit, not a huge amount, because you still want that special sauce being brought to the table when you've got to have it. But every now and again, just try and reduce the workload that he's being given or how many times you're relying on him physically. Then I think it's good for everybody. I think it's a very difficult balance to try and find, because for a quarterback whose physicality, whose athleticism is a big part of his game, you don't want to take that off the table. You don't want to try and turn Josh Allen into Peyton Manning or Tom Brady and say, never run the ball. We're not doing that. We're going to play from the pocket all the time. You want him to bring that to the table sometimes, but you also have to be aware that every time you do that, you're increasing that risk. So I think just playing with that balance and trying to move it a little bit away from that reliance on Josh Allen is all they're really doing with that.
Flipping to the defensive side of the football, Sean McDermott's going to be calling plays for the defense this year, so we might see some new wrinkles or maybe some new defensive sets to this team this year. But last year they were a top 10, top 5 team in a lot of statistical categories, even without some of their best players like Von Miller or a guy in Tre'Davious White who is trying to work his way back to the field at the end of the season. You have him listed as the 15th best cornerback heading in to the 2023 season. I think we're all expecting a Trey White like we knew in his Pro Bowl days when he was one of the best in the NFL. I think he's got a chip on his shoulder heading into the season, and we've heard from coaches and players that this guy has been working hard to get back at it and is looking very confident heading into this year. So what do you think he can do, and why was he at number 15 on that list?
Yeah, a very tough guy to rank, because obviously we know he's capable of truly elite play. Like, he's as good as any corner in the NFL when he's playing at his very best, but those injuries have taken a toll, and we haven't seen that version of Tre'Davious White for a little while. So when you have injuries or when you have a track record like that, it's very difficult to project forward what you're going to get. Where on the spectrum of play that we've seen from Tre'Davious White are we going to get in 2023? And at this point, I think it's been a little bit of time since we've seen that very best version of him, and we're sort of erring on the side of caution and waiting till we see it again. But it's there. We know that he's capable of that level of play, and if he can get himself 100% healthy and far enough removed from those injuries that he's back at 100% and he feels himself again, then this could be a huge, almost an addition to that Bills defense, right? Sort of getting a guy back that we haven't seen for a period of time. And that's one element I think that people overlook about this Buffalo defense is that secondary was banged up pretty much all last season, really from the start of the year all the way through, different players, but they never really had a 100% healthy version of that defense or the defensive backfield, the secondary. And if they get that this year, if they're just not dealing with this constant revolving door of injuries on the back end, like this defense could be a lot better than it was a year ago when it comes to coverage and play against the pass.
One last thing I got for you, Sam, is you also did an article, and it's always difficult to say, but some coaches really feel like some fan bases feel like their coaches are kind of wearing out their welcome. You start with Kevin Stefanski in Cleveland, Mike McCarthy even in Dallas, Brandon Staley, the LA Chargers, Josh McDaniels, Todd Bowles in Tampa Bay. Those are your top 5 guys that people might want to take it. If they don't get off to a good start or perhaps have a poor season throughout, the team may move on. Is this? I mean, what information do you use? Do you go to those? Do you ask people who know those teams, or do you strictly go by cut and dried production, win-loss, history, outlook? Has the team got better? You know what I mean? Their history as the head coach. Well, what do you use for that? And give us some insights as maybe which of these seats is the hottest.
Yeah, it's funny. I very specifically wanted to stay away from using the term the hot seat when I was writing that article, because I don't think some of those guys are necessarily on the hot seat. It's not like, a bad year and they're immediately going to get fired at the end of the season. They're going to be, one of those coaches that doesn't even make it to the following Monday. But I wanted to look at coaches that I thought were under pressure this season, whether it's to bounce back after a rough season and they are actually on the hot seat, or simply they need to prove something or need to kind of get over the hump or take the next step. And there's a few coaches I think that fall into that category where they're doing fine. It's not like they're even doing anything wrong. They just haven't had the results go their way. And there's a couple of different teams, I think, that are in that category where, because of this crazy landscape right now where Kansas City is so dominant and the AFC generally is such an incredibly loaded conference, there's a lot of teams, I think, that are, in abstract terms, they're doing well. They're winning games. They're having good records at the end of the year, but they're not getting where they want to go or where they need to go, because there's so many roadblocks in the way, and they just sort of need to try and get over that next step. But doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to fire one of those guys at the end of the year if it doesn't unravel. But I think you have that interesting dynamic this year where there's a couple of coaches that could be legitimately on the hot seat in those circumstances, even if they do a good job. And one of those, I think the most interesting one maybe of that entire list is Bill Belichick, who you're starting to hear that now. I think Tom Curran of NBC was saying that Belichick is very much on the hot seat this year, which seems crazy to talk about for arguably the greatest coach of all time, who's still winning games, just not enough.
Right.
Yeah, that is crazy. Before we let you go here, do you want to give us a quick teaser for the top 10 list that's going to come out tomorrow? I know you're not going to reveal any names, but anything that we should expect or the NFL fans should expect?
Yeah, I mean, it's the names that you would expect being on that top 10 list.
Mm-hmm.
There's no massive surprises, I think, there. Maybe the order will surprise people a little bit. One of the kind of defining traits, I think, of this list is we're not writing guys off too soon. A guy like Aaron Donald's been the best player in the NFL for a long period of time, and he got his first real injury last season. So he missed whatever it was, 6 games. We didn't get to see a full season of Aaron Donald. I wouldn't be too quick to write Aaron Donald off just yet. That guy is maybe the greatest defender to ever play the game. Let's not assume that one injury means it's time to write his eulogy.
All right,
Good
Sam,
stuff, Sam.
Thanks for the time. Thanks for jumping on with us. We appreciate the insight.
Anytime, guys. Take it easy.